You ever stop and think about where our ideas of justice really come from? I'm not talking about the big philosophical stuff, but the actual nuts and bolts, how you solve a problem when someone wrongs you. Well, today we're cracking open a seriously old playbook to find out.
Okay, so let's get right into it. What you're looking at here, it might look like something out of a fantasy story, but it's very, very real. It's a page from a 300-year-old book that was basically a catalog of legal action forms. See, back then, you couldn't just sue someone. Nope, you needed a special order from the king, and this was the guide for how to get one.
To make this all feel a little more real, let's just imagine a simple old-world problem. You're a farmer. You've got sheep. And one morning you wake up and find out your neighbor has not only sheared your sheep, but has taken off with the wool. So, what are you going to do? You can't exactly dial 911. You need to get the law involved. And back then, that all started with getting a writ.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll break down what a writ even is. Then, we'll see how these ancient forms protected your stuff and what happened when a deal went south. We're even going to look at how the system policed itself. And then, we'll wrap it all up by connecting it to why this centuries-old law still matters today.
So let's start with the absolute basics. What on earth is a writ? Honestly, the easiest way to think about it is like the king's official permission slip to use his courts. If you didn't have one, you didn't have a case. Simple as that.
So the official definition is it's a formal written order from the highest authority in the land. It was the actual key that unlocked the door to the whole justice system. And for every different type of problem, there was a specific writ, kind of like having a different form for every possible complaint.
And the language they used was just incredible. It wasn't vague at all. This is a direct translation from our source. It says someone with force and arms broke into a house and cut down trees. That phrase, force and arms, was absolutely critical. It meant the harm was direct, it was violent, and you couldn't really argue with it.
Which brings us right to the most fundamental use for these things, protecting your property. Your land, your house, your animals. I mean, this was the original castle doctrine in action.
And the main tool for that job was the writ of trespass. You can think of it as the legal sledgehammer for any wrong that was immediate and forceful. If somebody physically crossed a line and caused damage, this was the writ you reached for.
Now, this is what's so fascinating, just how specific these writs could get. These are all real examples from the book. We're talking about everything from, breaking into a house to fishing in someone else's pond. There's even a specific writ for when your neighbor's dogs chase and hurt your livestock. But my personal favorite? There was a writ for corrupting a water source by dumping lime and hemp into it. These weren't abstract theories. They were tailor-made solutions for real, messy, everyday problems.
But okay, what about the kinds of harm that weren't so direct, right? What happens when the problem isn't a punch in the face, but a broken promise? Well, that's where the law had to get a little more creative.
So the law evolved. It created a new tool, the writ of trespass upon the case. Now, upon the case is just old-timey talk for based on the special circumstances. While a regular trespass writ was for direct harm, like getting punched, a writ upon the case was for indirect harm. The best analogy is this. Someone leaves a log in the middle of the road, and later you come along and trip over it. The harm wasn't direct, but it was still a clear consequence of their action. And this little tweak opened up a whole new world of problems the law could solve.
And this is just brilliant, because it shows how modern these so-called ancient problems were. What we have here are the origins of consumer protection law. A craftsman takes your money but never builds the carts he promised. A guy sells you a horse, swears it's healthy, but it turns out the horse is lame. A merchant sells you bad wine. These are all examples of broken promises and shoddy goods, and they were all handled by this new, more flexible kind of writ.
So here's the bottom line. Every single time you hear about a breach of contract case in the news today, its legal DNA traces directly back to these trespass upon the case writs. This was the moment the law figured out how to deal with the consequences of a broken word.
So the law had ways to handle disputes between people. That's clear. But what happened when the system itself went wrong? I mean, how did they police the very process of justice? Well, for big-time problems, the king could issue what was called an oyer and terminer commission. It literally translates to hear and determine. You can think of it as a legal special forces unit. When a major crime wave or some kind of massive disturbance hit a town, the king would send his own justices right to the spot. Their one and only job was to hold court, sort everything out, and restore order. But this is where things get truly wild.
Let's say you lost your case, and you thought the jury got it wrong. Not just wrong, but like maliciously wrong. You could get a writ of attaint. This didn't just appeal the verdict. Oh no, it put the entire original jury on trial. A new, bigger jury of 24 knights would be gathered to hear the case all over again and decide if that first jury had delivered a false verdict on purpose.
And the stakes were incredibly high. If a juror was found guilty of delivering a false verdict, the punishment was absolutely brutal. According to the source, they'd be thrown in prison, and all of their goods, their property, and their lands would be seized by the crown. It just goes to show you how seriously the system took the integrity of a jury's oath.
So after digging through all this archaic language and these frankly strange procedures, why does any of it really matter to us now? Where are the echoes in our world today?
When you look at a page like this, what you're seeing is this incredibly detailed attempt to create a specific solution for every single problem you could imagine. This wasn't about abstract philosophy. It was a practical system built case by case, problem by problem, over hundreds of years.
And that's really the big takeaway, isn't it? The language of wherefore with force and arms might sound ancient to us, but the fundamental problems are identical to ours. How do we protect our stuff? How do we make sure people keep their promises? How do we guarantee a fair trial? These are timeless human questions.
So the next time you hear about a lawsuit, whether it's for breach of contract or trespassing, think about this ancient playbook. Our entire legal system is built on these foundations, and it really leaves us with a fascinating question. Our laws today are written in modern language, for sure, but just how many of these ancient ideas of fairness are still hidden deep inside?